Hello YouTube, this is James C. Sullivan D.O, the Outspoken Doctor, and this video is in follow-up to my previous video, MDs versus DOs. So, my good friend Luther Quarles saw that video. He said, "Hey Sully, I love what you're doing," and he left a suggestion. He suggested that I do a video on autism and vaccines. He knows how to get me riled up. He knows that is a subject that I am very passionate about, and so today on the Outspoken Doctor, Luther, you're gonna get your wish. Strap in. All right. So. This controversy is one that pains me. As many of you that are so educated on the topic realize, this correlation between autism and vaccines, it was put up by a physician that has been discredited for falsifying his research and was based on a study, I think with like 12 participants. It was lousy on all accounts, was basically trying to finagle the numbers to reflect a hypothesis that he had. That is not good science. It did a major disservice to the state of preventative medicine as we know it. So I am going to do a video about autism and vaccines in two parts because they're two separate issues. As many of you that have done your research out there know, if you've done any reading on autism, the root causes and things, you know that there's a lot of speculation out there. There's a lot of different causes being thrown up in the air. That is because, quite simply, autism spectrum disorder is a syndrome. It is a conglomeration of different factors that lead to a certain set of symptoms. Definition of a syndrome. And that's why there's a lot of conjecture around different causal factors. One of the big ones that they're discussing right now is gene mutations that govern neural inflammatory modulation, i.e. that govern those inflammatory responses that happen in the brain, which I believe kind of helps to explain why, in part, why there are so many dietary triggers, quote unquote, for symptoms of autism. These dietary triggers, as many of us know and have realized from our own dietary sensitivities, everything you eat has an inflammatory consequence. The American diet, the standard American diet, or SAD, as the aptly named acronym goes, is not very conducive to the health of one's gut flora, and often leads to a condition known as leaky gut. I think it's kind of been blown out of proportion. I see a lot of things blamed on leaky gut and a lot of, frankly, practices of predatory medicine surrounding the diagnosis of leaky gut. Leaky gut refers to a gut biome that's come into dysregulation, causing inflammation in the lining of the small intestines, and that inflammation creates breaches in the layer of the small intestine wherein lies the tolerance zone for the body. There's a reason that everything that we eat does not give us a full-blown allergic reaction. It is because the gut is the largest tolerance zone in the body. It's chock full of T cells, or T helper cells more specifically, that will find these immune complexes attached to them and signal for the body not to attack, and then appropriately tag this nutrition to go to the liver. Now, when leaky gut happens, there's disruption in there, and a lot more inflammation happens before that process can occur, because of just the too much is coming in all at once. So when that happens, we deal with a little bit of inflammation from the foods that we eat. We're always going to deal with a little bit of inflammation from the foods that we eat. I subscribe to a threshold model of disease, i.e., you have this disease state that, if you get over this certain line, you're going to have disease, and this line is a threshold of inflammatory markers. If you stay below, you're not going to have any symptoms of disease that crop up. But if your inflammatory markers rise above that, then you're going to get whatever symptom that you will manifest, which is dictated by whatever is written in the blueprints in your genes. So with that, there are a lot of food sensitivities that have been purported in kids with autistic spectrum disorder, and they're very real. I've seen some of the effects. We cannot really explain them. I think this does explain them. It makes so much sense. It's a facepalm. I mean, I don't see why more people aren't putting two and two together. There are also some theories running around about excess glutamate in the diet. I see that as well. Glutamate is a neurotransmitter, and it's also a constituent in the Krebs cycle, and it's also a amino acid constituent of a lot of the foods that we eat. Catherine Reed, a microbiologist, PhD researcher out of California, has done a lot of great work, I think, in tracking down some of the root etiologies in dietary sensitivities having to do with autism and autism spectrum disorder. I would encourage you to check out her website. It's called unblindmymind.org. Again, I think she's onto something. I don't think that's the entirety of the story, though, and she does a lot to educate physicians. She comes out and speaks to groups of physicians, hoping that together we'll all fill in the pieces. So back to the topic of autism as a syndrome. So back in undergraduate, when I was doing a class called Human Molecular Genetics, I took that one just for funsies. I wrote a paper about the difference in the human genome between humans and chimpanzees. It's less than 1% of our DNA. And many of these differences encompass regions designated in our genome as hypermutational regions. As the name dictates, they mutate more rapidly than other regions of our DNA. But a good chunk of those hypermutational regions govern brain structure and function. It's our DNA doing exactly what it was programmed to do. There are physiologic differences. I think this, combined with the neuroinflammatory modulation, and perhaps even some mitochondrial defects from mom, may all play into the syndrome of autism spectrum disorder. But at the same time, I'm going through all this research. I've been reading on autism for better than a decade, and I am consistently analyzing this new evidence based upon what I already know, what I've read on it, and the new findings, and it's all starting to come together. Autism is a syndrome, period. There is no one specific cause, because under the right conditions, someone on the autism spectrum can get better. Their symptoms decrease. They can behave almost normally. Now these things, these differences in structure and function in the human brain, differences in neuromodulation, combined with a high degree of neuroplasticity in the young brain. Now, neuroplasticity is a term that we use of the brain's ability to rewire itself, quite literally, forming new pathways. There's a term in in the research with autism spectrum disorder called neural bridging. And it's the process by which the synapses literally rewire to be as functional as they possibly can be. And I think this also explains many of the savantisms, many of the gifts that are seen in patients with autism spectrum disorder. And it's because this neural bridging wanders through a portion of the brain that is not normally activated and switches on an inherent talent in a way that's almost supernatural. You could almost refer to them as autistic superpowers. So you might argue, well, Dr. Sullivan, if there's a problem with neuroimmune modulation, then wouldn't vaccines cause some level of harm to a developing brain? No. Less so than catching the illness itself. When you actually undergo, and I'm sure many of you have come across this with, say, your annual flu vaccine, when you actually undergo the illness itself, that's a lot more inflammation visited upon you than the vaccine creates. And people might argue, well, what about visiting all these vaccines on a child all at once? I've heard these arguments. I've had these discussions with patients. The vaccines that we have nowadays are a lot cleaner than the vaccines of old. We've done a much better job at isolating just that part that the immune system is going to respond to. There are some studies that would suggest that maternal sickness while you're carrying the baby, so mom getting a cough, a cold, a flu, something while you are gestating your child, can somehow lend to causal factors of autism. Maybe. I can't say one way or another. But I do know that a lot more happens after the baby is born to their immune system. A lot more happens to us in the environment than happens in utero. And I don't think that serves to do anything more than just create more anxiety and fear for expectant mothers, and to cause parents to potentially blame themselves for a developmental disorder that their child has incurred. I just don't see the wisdom in it. And I just wanted to take a second to discuss autism spectrum disorder. This may be a new one for a lot of you listening. This actually encompasses traditional autism, the more debilitating variety that many of us have come to know, as well as Asperger's, and even higher functioning forms of Asperger's, really everything in between. They see that there are really a broad spectrum of symptoms, and I refer to it as a learning disability, as that is how it is classified under the DSM-5, which is a book of mental health diagnoses and criterion that we use to identify such things. And for those of the viewers that have tuned in, that they maybe know somebody that's on the spectrum, have a child that's on the spectrum, mine is a message of hope. There is a very high degree of neuroplasticity in younger minds if we can cut down the inflammation, minimizing what they take in from the foods that they eat, doing activities to encourage neuroplasticity. There are a lot of things in mainstream education today that have to do with autism spectrum disorder that I frankly don't agree with. Recently, I was at a talk with Temple Grandin, arguably more famous for overcoming her disability than for her work in engineering. and animal behavior. But Dr. Grandin also shared the same sentiment as I did, that we have a tendency to coddle too much, and that is not the way. If you want to encourage development, if you want to encourage neuroplasticity, then you have to stretch the boundaries. You have to push the comfort zone. You have to make the brain begin to adapt. It's not just my view. I've got the blessing of Temple Grandin herself, Dr. Grandin, with the same opinion that we coddle too much, and it's a mistake. It's a mistake to teach someone that they have a disability and that it's okay to use that disability as an excuse to be disabled. A lot of us are failing in really addressing and combating this properly. So there's this movement that's come about, and it's I think it's referred to as unmasking. So it's encouraging people on the autism spectrum to be more autistic. Wow, just wow. I don't think it's wrong to teach your kids to act normal. This is referred to commonly as masking. You're masking the symptoms of autism. You're teaching them how to fake how normal people behave. And I don't think that is wrong. Honestly, I think by doing that, you're doing them a favor. You have to break it down. You have to tell them things that normal people would usually glean inherently. Like telling your kid to swing their arms when they walk, even teaching them how. Telling someone that a reciprocal response, like, "Oh, how are you doing today?" And then they proceed to tell a stranger exactly how they're doing that day, that they didn't literally mean it. A lot of these little idiosyncrasies, I think, definitely don't come inherently to people on the spectrum. And I don't think it's wrong to teach your children the right thing. I don't think it's right to say to all the people on the spectrum, "Hey, no, go ahead and act like you're on the spectrum." You're not doing yourself any favors in society that way. Again, that's just, a doctor's opinion. Take it for what it's worth. As I mentioned earlier, reducing the amount of glutamate intake in the diet, trying to isolate those things that maybe cause more inflammation, perhaps not allergies, but food sensitivities. Certain foods, based on the individual, may cause untoward reactions which raise inflammatory markers and thereby drive increased symptoms. There's different supplementations. I know that there's been purported to have a lot of methylation dysfunctions in the genome with people that are on the spectrum. Frankly, there's methylation deficits in about a third of our population. There's an argument there to be had about taking perhaps methylated B vitamins, that is, vitamins in their end stage usable form. A third of our population cannot get their B vitamins to their end stage usable form. I would say to that if you're going to take B vitamins, take a methylated B vitamin. It can't hurt. It can hurt if you're taking vitamins that you don't need because they have to filter through the kidney. If your urine is neon, take less. Again, to those viewers that have a child on the spectrum or know someone that's on the spectrum, taking these steps, optimizing the diet, keeping the diet healthy, minimizing factors that promote neural inflammation, teaching your children what right looks like, going that extra mile to maybe lay it out in plain speak, something that they don't seem to realize from interacting with everyone else. Fostering those things that they seem to glom onto, so far as learning, and using those to branch into other things, new things, and pushing those comfort boundaries. I think that's the best way forward. So that is my knowledge drop for the day. Remember, this was medical information and should not be considered medical advice. Medical advice is a conversation best had between you and your doctor. If you like the content today, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have any suggestions for future content, you can go ahead and leave them in the comments down below. And I look forward to doing the next video, which will be on vaccines.